September 12th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. I'm Blaney Miller, Chair of the Commission. Our August 22nd regular meeting was canceled due to lack of a quorum, so we have a very full agenda today. I would ask that everyone please be efficient in your comments and avoid redundancy so that we can hear from as many viewpoints on as many cases as possible today. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. By show of hands, are there any members of the public who would like to speak on an item that is not contained on today's agenda? Seeing none, moving on. Before moving to committee reports, please note there's one change in the agenda today. Today, we will be hearing 4 items that originally appeared on the agenda from the August 22nd meeting that was canceled. These items appear in today's agenda as items 1, 2, 3, and 7. After discussion with staff, we'd like to move all 4 of those items to the top of new business. So on today's agenda, items 1, 2, and 3 will remain the same. And without objection, I'd like to move item 7, CP 423, downtown transition areas, to agenda item number 4. After that, we will proceed through the agenda as listed. So moving on to committee reports. We have 3 items to review today. The first 2 items related to the New Bern corridor, Commissioner Fox has previously been recused, and without objection, I will recuse her from these 2 items again today. Thank you, Commissioner Fox. Moving on to the first 2 items, the CP 722 and Z 9222. I will turn it over to our Committee of the Whole Chair, Dean Rains.
Thanks, Chair Fox. In the interest of time, I'm going to just give a brief summary. We had a meeting, a special meeting, Committee of the Whole, on August 29th, 2023. We discussed these 2 items. And we requested more information from staff on the comprehensive plan amendment, and significantly more discussion is needed on the rezoning case. We started a section of the east segment, and we were moving west. I would like to request another special meeting later this month. Before I do, to get a vote on that, I'd like to ask if anybody has any comments or commentary on recommendations on those 2 cases. I think no. All right. Yeah.
So, thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to, after discussion with some of the other commissioners, I'd like to recommend that we request staff to provide us with additional mapping tools for the TOD station area mapping tools that are available. So by whatever means is deemed most appropriate by staff, whether through the existing tool or some other mapping application hosted by the city. We like the mapping tool, the TOD, but we would love to see, we would like to have a transparency slider for the layers that are hosted, and we'd like to be able to toggle layers on and off, add a measure tool, and we'd like to add the future land use map as a layer to the application. Make that available to the commissioners.
Thank you. I believe we've previously discussed that with staff, and they think that can be available for the next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So going forward, we went out and requested some dates for the next special meeting, and we recommended Wednesday, September 27th, 4 o'clock in council chambers. So I'd like to get a show of hands for this group to see if they can attend this meeting. Everyone unanimously can attend. So we will set that special meeting for Wednesday, September 27th. Please note that we do still have a regular Committee of the Whole meeting on Thursday, the 28th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, Commissioner Fox may resume her duties, which is good timing because the next item on the agenda is the committee report for the Text Change Committee. And I will turn it over to Committee Chair Fox for that report.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Miller. Going through a little bit of history, the TOD overlay was created in the Unified Development Ordinance, which was adopted back in 2013. In October of 2021, the text change of the TOD overlay was adjusted to meet the needs of a bus rapid transit system, not the needs of a light rail or commuter rail system as it was originally created. In July of 2022, this TOD was applied to the Western BRT and Southern BRT routes. Throughout the fall of 2022, the New Bern Avenue TOD zoning overlay was filed, and that was following the completion of the New Bern Corridor Plan, which is currently under review by the Planning Commission, which you just discussed. During the community conversations around the application of the TOD overlay on New Bern, staff identified a few modifications that warranted potential revision. And as a result, the council authorized a text change to remove the prohibition on single-family homes and duplexes and limit the size of commercial uses within apartment buildings. The current text change addresses these issues, as well as reorganizing some sections and editing the text for readability. The Text Change Committee discussed these items at our June 7th and August 22nd meetings, after which we voted unanimously to recommend approval. I believe Keegan McDonald has an update and a summary of the TOD revisions.
Great, thank you, Chair Fox. So I will skip over some of this background because it was just reviewed. Just again noting that it did appear at the Text Change Committee twice, and the committee did recommend approval 4-0. So before getting into what these revisions entail, just want to cover briefly what is already in the TOD regulations. So they apply mixed-use density and dimensional standards to residential districts where the TOD is applied. Also applies urban street frontage requirements to mixed-use districts, and in mixed-use districts includes an affordability height bonus. The way that height bonus works is provides a 50% story bonus if 20% of the additional units in those bonus stories are held as affordable to residents making 60% of the area median income, and that affordability requirement is to remain in place for 30 years. There is also a 30% height bonus afforded to non-residential development, and that does not carry any associated affordability requirement, again, with the expectation that those uses are of commercial nature. Additional existing TOD regulations, there's a prohibition on low-density residential uses as well as auto-oriented uses, a 2-story height minimum for new structures, an allowance for certain limited uses in the residential mixed use and office mixed use to be larger than otherwise permitted, and then also special permissions for non-conforming structures and uses. What those entail essentially in the TOD are for structures that are damaged more than 50% of their value to be repaired, whereas under typical circumstances with non-conforming structures, that's not permitted. It also allows for voluntary demolition of non-conforming structures and for them to be replaced like for like. Allows for the expansion of non-conforming structures with no hard limit, but it does require a special use permit to be issued by the Board of Adjustment. And for non-conforming uses, they can be discontinued for up to 730 days and then recontinued, whereas the typical limitation is a year, 365 days. So again, this is just comparing special permissions that were put in place for structures and or uses made non-conforming by the TOD regulations, and in the left column there is the typical nonconformity standards that we have in our UDO. One thing of interest I took from the Text Change Committee meeting was just a clarification on overlap between the TOD and HODs. So this shows existing TOD in orange, proposed TOD along the New Bern corridor in green, and then HODs in purple. So there is no proposed overlap between the two. Originally, there were 3 landmarks included, as I understand it, but there is an active recommendation for those to be removed from the TOD zoning along New Bern. Quick summary, certificates of appropriateness are required for landmarks and HODs, and that will always control over the TOD standards. COAs control things such as building design, setback footprint, and lot dimensions. One key distinction between landmarks and HODs is COAs do not control after a landmark is demolished, but they do control after a demolition in the HOD. So with that, I'm just going to briefly cover the three main buckets within the TOD revisions text change. The first is the removal of the prohibition for single and two-unit living. The second is instituting a maximum square footage for certain limited uses within the apartment building type. And then the last, sort of a catch-all related to clarifications, really just trying to shore up existing intent and improve readability. So single and two-unit living, these and other auto-oriented and suburban uses were originally prohibited to encourage more pedestrian-friendly and transit-supportive development. The mapping of the TOD, as stated today, would render these uses and structures non-conforming. And again, through outreach during the New Bern TOD remapping and the relatively high presence of single and two-unit living structures compared to other TOD corridors, we felt it was in the best interest of existing residents to remove that prohibition on single and two-unit living, and that doing so would really not hinder the ultimate goals of the TOD, seeing as the allowance for multi-unit living within those residential areas would still be permitted. It just would provide more flexibility to existing homeowners primarily. As it relates to limited uses, generally speaking, within the residential mixed use and office mixed use districts, certain commercial uses are permitted, but they're required to meet certain standards. And the two of note here affected by the TOD most directly are 1 and 2 listed. So the first states that the use must be located in the first floor of a corner unit in an apartment building type and located at the intersection of 2 public streets, and that unit cannot exceed 4,000 square feet in gross floor area. The TOD as currently written exempts the following uses shown on the left part of your screen from standards 1 and 2. So they no longer have to be in a corner unit of an apartment and can exceed 4,000 square feet in gross floor area as currently written. As we've begun administering the TOD regulations, we realized that allowing commercial uses of an unlimited size would contradict the commonly understood definition of an apartment. And as we kind of frame it in the code, allowing unlimited commercial uses would make the building more akin to a mixed use or general building, and neither of those are permitted within the residential mixed use district. So the solution we looked at was to instead place a higher cap on the square footage for those limited uses within the apartment building type. So we set that cap at 10,000 square feet, so that's still an increase over the base allowance if the TOD wasn't applied, but again, it sets some firm upper limit, and I just include this image to note that typical pharmacies are about 10,000 square feet in size, just to give you a sense for the size of retail that could be included within an apartment building type. And then last, the clarifications. So there was language added to clarify the interaction between the TOD and other standards. So you can see the various sections amended, first stating that if there's conflicting language, typically it's resolved in favor of the more stringent regulation, and that's to account for unintended conflicts. Of course, the TOD creates some additional permissions, so we want to make that clear. TOD is allowing for things that the base district may not otherwise permit, even if it's a more lax regulation. Clarify that infill regulations do not apply in the TOD. That's already been interpreted, but spelling that out explicitly. Clarifying that uses permitted in the TOD are permitted even if prohibited in the base zoning district. So that allows multi-unit living, for instance, in lower density residential districts where the TOD is applied to be permitted. And then also clarifying that uses prohibited in the base zoning district are also prohibited in the TOD. Again, that's how we've been interpreting it, but making that clear in the TOD section itself. Also, with the clarifications bucket, reorganizing standards for when the TOD is applied to residential districts. So again, after administering it, reading through it more, we realized there were some extraneous standards within the residential subsection of the TOD. and actually kind of make it more confusing. So we decided to delete those to avoid that confusion. We also created a separate subsection for permitted uses in residential-based districts. Really, the only additional permitted use, again, is multi-unit living when it comes to the TOD being applied to a residential district. And then chose to group all of the height regulations in one subsection, which is 551H. So that section now is called height, and it encompasses the residential standards and then also the mixed-use standards, including the height bonus. And then last, because we are now removing the prohibition on single and 2-unit living, we thought it best to exempt those structures from the frontage requirements. We don't want to hold a detached house or duplex to build to requirements, for instance. And also exempting those structures from the 2-story height minimum. That's something we specifically heard from residents who have 1-story homes or who may wish to build one or add an addition. That could create challenges. So just instituting the standard 3-story, 40-foot height maximums for single and 2-unit living structures, but not requiring them to be 2 stories. So in terms of process, of course, this text change already went through text change committee, so it's back at Planning Commission for your action, and the deadline is October 5th. So I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Bring it back to the table. I know we've already had 2 committee meetings on this topic with robust discussion. Is there any further discussion or questions at the table? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Fox?
I move to recommend approval of TC 223 as it is reasonable and in the public interest, and I move to adopt the consistency statement dated September 12th, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of this zoning text amendment.
Thank you. We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Commissioner Rains has seconded. Any additional discussion or debate on the merits? All those in favor, please say aye. I'm going to change it up a little bit. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. That passes unanimously 6-0. Okay. Moving on to new business. There are 9 items on the new business agenda today. These requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, so we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation, and then we will hear from the public. Just to clarify, I think I misspoke earlier about the agenda moves. The first 3 items, D1, 2, and 3, will remain the same, and then we're going to move item D8, Comprehensive Plan Amendment, or CP4, CP 23 with the downtown transition areas. We're going to move that to the new item number 4, and then we will proceed with the rest of the agenda. So moving on to the first item, item D1, rezoning case Z23 or 2523 at Pool Road. This case is to rezone approximately 0.76 acres from R6 conditional use to neighborhood mixed use, 3 stories conditional use. The new deadline for action is November 11th, 2023. We'll now turn to Sarah Shaughnessy for a presentation from City Planning staff.
Good morning, thank you. So yes, this is a request to rezone about 3/4 of an acre just west of the Neuse River. The request is to rezone from R6 conditional use to neighborhood mixed use, 3 stories conditional use. Zoning in the area is mostly residential. The closest zoning is R4. There is a small commercial node west of the site, CX3 and RX4. Most of that land is vacant currently, except for a small convenience store. An aerial view of the site, as you can see, it's right by the Neuse River Trail, just across from the Pool Road canoe launch with access to the Neuse River, and then again, the surrounding uses are residential and commercial. Some additional views of the site, which is currently vacant as well. And then the 3 proposed conditions, the first is to limit residential units to 12 total units. The second limits hours of operation for any commercial uses on the property from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then the third is a prohibition on bars, taverns, and nightclubs. Looking at the existing versus proposed zoning, the proposed zoning would allow some additional residential units and then two slides showing the entitlement change since you're changing from a residential district only to a mixed-use district, and the standards are a little bit different. So this is showing that additional residential units would be proposed, and then some additional office and retail square feet would be allowed under the proposed use. A lower walk score, lower transit score, and lower bike score than average, although Pool Road is undergoing an improvement, which would add some sidewalks and a bike lane. Transportation costs are lower overall in this area, and it does have a better access to jobs overall compared to the city as a whole. It is served by Route 18, Go Raleigh, although currently there's no sidewalk connecting the site to the bus stop. Looking at affordability, the proposal does not include subsidized units, but it would allow additional units and additional housing types. There is a higher percentage of residents of color in this area, a larger population with less than a high school education, but rent is increasing at a slower rate compared to the city as a whole. The request is inconsistent with the future land use map designation of low-scale residential. There's no urban form designation for this site. Consistent overall with a comprehensive plan. A number of consistent policies here. And then the inconsistent policies being that future land use map consistency. Fire staff has also noted a fire service issue here, although that would be present whether or not the site was developed under the current zoning or the proposed zoning. If approved, the request would amend the future land use map from low-scale residential to neighborhood mixed use. Just a image of how that map would change. No outstanding issues, and again, your deadline for action is November 11th. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll turn to the applicant and those in favor. You have a total of 10 minutes to speak. When you come to the podium, please state your name for the record as well.
Good morning. I'm Choli Aronson from Progressive AE, representing the owners of 6401 Pool Road. Forgive me. And we just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what we are thinking that we would like to put on this site if this zoning is redone. You can see again the conditions that we have suggested and worked with staff on, and one of the big things was changing to actually neighborhood mixed use 3-story to be more consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. And I know that's what you're seeing before you is the NX3 zoning. And what we're looking at is really doing neighborhood serving mixed use, so retail on the ground floor here with a layer of apartments over a parking garage. And one of the big things and reasons why this site seemed very attractive, again, there is a convenience store across the street, but this is right at sort of a trailhead for the Neuse River Trail, right? With the canoe launch, this seemed like a very ideal site. If you directly across the street would be that connection to the Neuse River Trail parking area in this location, and proposing sidewalks around the site, which, as Sarah said, are coming with the Pool Road expansion as well. So things that could both serve the neighborhood as well as people coming to visit that Neuse River Trail and the canoe launch. So this is sort of what we're looking at is, that we could have a very low scale retail area, whether that is, bike repair shops, small cafes, something of that nature, with the apartments above. And then providing on the backside, this would be a 2-story parking garage to provide all the parking for the retail as well as the apartments above. Again, one of the thoughts in this area is there isn't a lot of local neighborhood serving retail. That could be very helpful in this area. Just speak closer to the mic, please. Yes, of course, I'm sorry. Usually I'm loud enough that it doesn't matter.
So for the broadcast.
Of course, I understand. And then the other thing is that this does provide sort of a different option for housing in this area. Having the smaller scale apartment housing, which is not really something that's offered in this area, does provide affordability just because of the smaller scale and the variety of housing that is not currently available. And what you can see is a two-story parking garage proposing potentially 57 spaces. And again, this is just concept. We know you're approving zoning, but we do want to show you what we're thinking. And then 12 apartments above. So this would be more than adequate parking for all of the apartment units, the retail, as well as additional parking for the neighborhood, sort of as an overflow, as we have heard that that may be an issue in this area as well for people visiting. So we want to make sure that we more than adequately would provide parking so that this additional use would not impact parking on the surrounding streets at all. That's all I've got. If there are any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? Then moving on, if there are any members of the public here to speak in opposition, you have a total of 10 minutes. Seeing none, I'll bring the discussion back to the table. Excuse me. Any questions or comments from the commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like seeing this. I think this is a great opportunity. My only concern is that with the lack of any urban frontage, and I know there's none called for here, but this kind of development was not foreseen in the future land use map. I'd hate to see parking go between the street and the building here. And my understanding of the NX zoning would not apply any frontage, and that would not be prohibited under this rezoning. It looks like you don't want to put parking there.
Right. I mean, if that is something that, so of course we do have two streets. We have Pool Road and we have Riverview. So parking sort of does have to be on one of them, obviously. We are required to enter off of Riverview, and we'd be more than willing to add an additional condition to have no parking on Pool Road if that's something that would be desired.
I would be interested in seeing that if I had the support of my fellow commissioners.
Of course. I think we'd be happy to add that condition, especially given that there's no access allowed off of Pool Road anyway. It would make parking there very difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions and comments? Commissioner Peeler?
Yeah, obviously this is a preliminary plan, and thanks for bringing that. I know it said 12 units would be allowable under the new zoning. How many? Do you have an idea of how many you think would be in this plan?
12.
You think
We
12?
do want to build the 12, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Other comments and questions? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, we're not entertaining a motion. You would like additional time to provide additional conditions, is that correct? One additional condition?
Yes, I think that would be, if that is amenable, we
Yes.
would be very happy to do so.
Thank you.
Is that something that can be amended at this time? I don't know the
Yes,
rules.
so in order to appear on our next agenda, which is Tuesday, September 26th, the new conditions would need to be submitted by this Friday.
Okay. And it's not something that can be amended during this process, this meeting today?
Correct. They'd need to be submitted and signed by this Friday, and then we could hear this item again on our September 26th meeting.
All right.
Does that work for you this week?
Of course.
To get them in? Okay,
Yes.
great. Then with that, I'd like to defer this case to our September 26th meeting to provide time for additional conditions.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Moving on to item D2, case Z3023. This case is to rezone approximately 1.84 acres from R4 to R10 conditional use. The new deadline for action is November 11th, 2023. We will now turn back to Sarah Shaughnessy for a presentation from city planning staff.
Let's see. Just make it a present mode here. All right, sorry about that. Good morning again. So this is a request to rezone about 2 acres just east of Capitol Boulevard on Trawick Road. There are 2 properties, one with frontage mostly on, or all of its frontage on Trawick Road, and then one just behind it. Your deadline for action is November 11th. Zoning in the area is mostly residential. Again, the closest zoning is R4 and R6. An aerial view of the site, again, mostly residential zoning with some industrial and commercial uses close to the intersection of Millbrook and Trawick Road. Some additional views of the site. The site currently has 1 dwelling unit located on the front property with frontage on Trawick. Also included an image looking north on Sedgefield. That's Sedgefield Woods subdivision. And then looking west on Trawick and east on Trawick to get an idea of the surrounding area. There is 1 proposed condition, and that is to allow cross-access between the parcels unless those parcels are recombined. Looking at the change in zoning, the proposed zoning would permit some additional units as well as reduce the required setbacks. Higher walk score than average, higher transit score than average, lower bike score than average, and lower overall transportation costs and better access to jobs compared to the city as a whole. The site is served by 2 routes. The request does not include subsidized housing units, but it would add to the housing supply and allow for smaller and different types of units than are currently allowed under the existing zoning. There is a higher percentage of residents of color in this area. The site itself sits between 2 census tracts, so all of our demographic information we pull from the U.S. Census, and that's based on census tracts. So the rent that in the tract that includes the site, which is the northernmost tract, is increasing at a faster rate relative to the city. And then lastly, of note, the USDA considers this area a food desert. The requested zoning is inconsistent with the future land use map designation of low-scale residential, but it is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. And then, as with the previous case, there's no urban form designation for this area. A number of consistent policies here. The inconsistent policy being the future land use map and zoning consistency. It would amend, if approved, the future land use map from low scale to moderate scale residential. Here's a map of that change. Again, your deadline for action is November 11th. There are no outstanding issues.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to the applicant. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
So good morning, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Keenan Condor, and I'm an attorney with Morningstar Law Group here in Raleigh. I'm representing the owner of the properties at 3319 and 3315 Trawick Road. And the owners of the properties are here represented by Hannah Jaber, who is here today. And we're here to rezone these properties from R4 to R10 with a conditional use. And overall, the purpose of this rezoning is just to provide greater flexibility for any future development of these properties. So as Sarah said, these properties front Trawick Road. There's 2 properties in total. The first is relatively open with a single family home kind of in the center of the site that's set back substantially from Trawick Road, with the second lot being behind, undeveloped, mostly forested with about, I think it's 15 feet of frontage onto Trawick Road. Overall, this site is relatively underutilized and is really primed based on that for beneficial infill development. Here's a front view of the site, again, that affirms that much of this site, at least the front lot, is open with few trees, and also shows that substantial setback from Trawick Road. In total, these 2 properties represent 1.84 acres. And here I want to show where these properties are in relation to the downtown urban core. As you can see, the site is just outside the 440 Beltline, but it really has great access to the downtown area via Capitol Boulevard, which is very close to this property. Why I think that makes it great for infill development is that any future residents at this site would have a very easy access or easy commute to downtown via Capitol Boulevard. And that, of course, reduces vehicle miles traveled, reduces the carbon emissions of any commuters that would live here, but also connects any future residents to commercial opportunities, jobs, pretty much most of what people need. Something I want to emphasize here, although we are outside, we're not in the urban form map, we're outside the frequent transit area, we're actually very close to the robust bus service along Capitol Boulevard. Currently, Trawick Road does not have any sidewalks at the moment, but my understanding is that that is what the city wants. The city wants to develop Trawick Road with a 2-lane avenue with sidewalks on either end. So eventually, at some point in the life cycle of this development, there should be sidewalks along the Trawick Road heading towards bus access on Capitol Boulevard. So again, another emphasis is that any residential development here, in addition to having a very quick car commute to downtown, would also have a very quick bus commute to downtown. And here is the current zoning map. Again, everything north of Trawick Road is R4. Much of what is south of Trawick Road is R6. We are seeking R10 with conditional use. And as you can see over there on the right, there is already an R10 CU district very close to this property. So given that proximity, it's unlikely that this would be out of step with the zoning character of this neighborhood. And as Sarah said, we offered a condition as a result of our conversations with the planning department. This is a cross-access condition that would allow, since these are 2 parcels currently, were the parcels to be developed, we would only utilize 1 curb cut, 1 access to the property. But this condition will likely be made moot because it is most likely that these parcels will be combined at the time of development. And this is the last slide. I just want to emphasize some of the advantages of the R10 district. Ultimately, as I said earlier, the purpose of this rezoning is to provide greater flexibility for any future development of the site. And here are some of the ways in which the R10 district does provide that flexibility. What you're most likely to see on this project, and although we haven't engaged an engineer yet, the client hasn't engaged an engineer yet, what you're most likely to see is some kind of diverse housing type, probably something like townhomes. And the R10 district and its more permissive site constraints will provide that future development with greater flexibility. So again, it also creates a possibility of other types of diverse housing types. And so again, that is the purpose here. And last thing I want to say is that Hannah and her husband have owned this property since 2005. They are the property owners and and the applicants for this rezoning. They're not institutional developers. So this is really just a preliminary step for them to provide that greater flexibility. So there is not complete certainty about what will eventually be developed at that site, but some kind of diverse residential housing type is most likely, and most likely is the thing that's best allowed under the R10 zoning. So, and that's pretty much my presentation. I want to thank you for your time and your consideration, and I'm available to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public here who would like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, we'll move on to the opposition. Those opposed to this case have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Seeing none, we will bring this back to the table. Questions and comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Fox? Maybe?
I was slowly leading into it.
I see.
Now, I was going to ask staff a question about any dimensional standards or requirements for the placement of parking that might be included in R10, because I'm not recalling that there are any.
No, and most of our urban frontage standards apply to mixed-use districts rather than residential.
Correct.
Yeah.
With the lack of some of the certainty associated with what might be developed here, and I don't necessarily want to include additional buffers adjacent to single-family homes. I don't generally see the need to buffer houses from houses, regardless of the shape that those houses take. I might be interested to hear if there are any other thoughts on how you might configure the development as you move forward.
I think the applicant would be open-minded to accepting any conditions that the Planning Commission would propose, but because the applicant here is the property owner, and because the applicant has not engaged with an engineer or a land planner or anything like that, unfortunately, we really don't know what this project could look like at this time, and so it's hard to provide you with any greater certainty, I think, at this point.
Thank you.
Other questions and comments from the commissioners? No, was there any additional follow-up on conditions considered?
I was just going to ask staff to maybe explain to the Planning Commission how townhouse and apartment setback would be treated in the event those unit types were developed versus single-family or duplex, that
would be
might help
great.
you assess your question about parking.
Yeah, let me pull up. So these are the change in setbacks. This would be for apartments as well as for townhomes, and that's a change from what is existing in terms of setbacks for detached homes. And again, for residential districts, urban frontage is not recommended by policy.
Thank you.
No further questions. That answers my question.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions and comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Yes, Commissioner Bennett?
I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated September 12th, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Thank you very much. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Commissioner Otwell is seconded. Any further discussion or debate on the merits? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously 6-0. Moving on to item D3, case Z3223 at Stratford Court. This case is to rezone approximately 0.64 acres from R2 to R4. The new deadline for action is November 11th. We'll now turn to Hannah Reckow for a presentation from City Planning staff.
Good morning. So this is a request to rezone one parcel, 3902 Stratford Court, from residential 2 to residential 4. You can see the zoning in this area is largely residential. There's a large area of R4 and R2 zoning. And then you can see a little bit of red picking out from the top of that map. That is the start of North Hills, north of I-440. So just a more zoomed out image of where we are, south of I-440, off Lassiter Mill Road. There's low and medium scale residential in this area, and then higher scale and commercial uses up in North Hills around Six Forks Road. So zooming into the site, you can see a frontage on Stratford Court, also some lot frontage on Lassiter Mill Road. There is currently one detached house on the site. You can see in these images here. And the requested district is a general use district, so no zoning conditions are offered at this time. So a shift from one residential district to another, pretty small change. There's a change in minimum lot size, which does allow a little bit more flexibility. And then I'll also note, not represented in this graph here, is a difference in the maximum impervious surface coverage. It increases with R4, so that's another element that offers more flexibility for building on the site. So this site has sort of an average bike and transit score compared with the city overall, a higher walk score, and higher proximity to jobs, likely with that proximity to North Hills, not too far away. There is bus service, Route 8 runs along Lassiter Mill Road. And there would be the potential for a slight increase, maybe of 1 unit to the housing that could be established on the site. No guaranteed subsidized units, but a variety of housing types and within walking distance of transit. And then the census tract that this site is located in, residents are less likely than the city average to be racial minorities or low income. Medium rent has increased nearly twice as fast as the city average here. And there are some historical restrictive covenants that would have restricted development beyond UDO requirements in nearby neighborhoods. So the future land use map designation is low-scale residential. R4 is consistent with that designation. There are a few designations on the urban form map. It's in a frequent transit area, but the requested district is residential, so no zoning frontage could be applied here. And is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. A few consistent policies, which include the future land use map, and then no inconsistent policies were identified with this request. So that is the end of the overview. Your deadline for action is November 11th.
Thank you very much. Turning to the applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. My name is Matt Stabler. My wife Bonnie and I are the applicants. We currently live at 3902 Stratford Court, and the genesis for this request are really twofold. We've lived at that address for 9 years. We love the neighborhood. We want to stay, but since we've lived there, our family has grown. We've outgrown our house a little bit, and since we've lived there, Lassiter Mill has gotten a lot busier, both auto traffic as well as the sidewalk that our driveway crosses over as we leave going in and out every day. And so the reason we're asking for the R4 designation is to give us a little more flexibility to do either a remodel or a rebuild on our current lot. As you've seen from the presentation, we've got a very odd-shaped lot that most of the frontage is on Lassiter Mill, which gives us a little bit of trouble trying to design a footprint, and so we wanted some more flexibility that way. We also want to add either a driveway or a parking pad in the front. We could see as time goes on and Lassiter Mill continues to become busier and busier, maybe wanting access through the front out Stratford Court, which we currently don't have. In going through the process, do want to acknowledge that we had several neighbors reach out, kind of ask us what was going on, why we were doing it. I know several years back there was an effort to purposely rezone part of our neighborhood R2. As we've explained to them what we're doing, why we're doing it, that we don't intend to subdivide our lot or anything like that. It's purely to give us flexibility in how we want to design and build a new house. Everyone has been supportive once we've kind of explained what is going on to them. So that's really why we're here, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public here who would like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, we'll turn to the opposition. Those opposed to this case have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, I will bring it back to the table. Thoughts and questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Alwell.
I was wondering if we could get a little bit more clarification on the impervious surface differences and what the maximum impervious surface would be allowed under R4, and then maybe have stormwater staff talk about what that would imply.
Thank you very much. I believe that might be a question for staff.
Yes, Sally Hoyt, Engineering Services Stormwater. In terms of the changing the zoning would change the amount of impervious surface that could be implemented without further controls or study. So I believe this would go from 24% to 38%. if it went from R2 to R4. I would note that there are existing ways to increase the impervious threshold without rezoning that are already in the UDO. So those are a study of water surface elevations and implementing a stormwater control measure.
And to clarify, a stormwater control measure could include an above-ground use, something like a rain garden.
Right. There's a whole spectrum of things. So it could include a rain garden or bioretention, cistern. It could include infiltration. Those are probably the most common things we see on residential properties.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions and comments from the commissioners?
Some comments.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Miller. I agree that this is in compliance with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, but I believe that the purposes of the comprehensive plan items that it is in compliance with, the city is not seeing a benefit from not changing a use. So the benefit for going from R4 to R2, as in the comprehensive plan, would be an additional housing types and additional housing, and that's not going to come to fruition with this rezoning. I don't think that I would support this unless we could have a condition that would limit stormwater to its current outflow.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Bennett.
So just to clarify, the rezoning is to get more impervious area, but stormwater is saying that can be done without the rezoning?
That's correct. There's two ways existing in the UDO that are routinely used by homeowners and builders.
Okay.
To increase the impervious threshold beyond the amounts in the zoning base table.
So could I ask the applicant then why you're seeking the rezoning?
Yes, ma'am. Our understanding in talking with both staff and folks that we contacted about this were that we have a house design plan and drawn that takes up approximately 30% of our lot with impervious surface, 30 to 32 as we kind of mapped it out. That until we did a flood study to actually show what it was, that it was impossible to tell whether or not that would require, or whether we would have to take active measures that then require ongoing monitoring and reporting. And that was something that we were just not interested in doing. It's a lot of extra work and expense when we look at our house kind of in the overview and how many other houses around us are for.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question. And the need for the additional impervious surface, just to clarify, part of that is so that you can build a new driveway to have a frontage and exit directly onto the cul-de-sac instead of entering and exiting on Lassiter Mill Road. Is that correct?
Correct.
I know that, and are you seeking to add any additional density as well, or any to this project?
As part of the plans we have drawn, we have, currently our house only has, half of it has a basement. With rebuilding completely, we would add a full basement with the idea that there's half of it we still don't know what we would do, but having flexibility, knowing if one of us needed one of our parents or both parents to move in the future, that we would have kind of that additional space that we don't have a need for now, that we just want to have flexibility for in the future.
That makes sense. While I personally share the concerns about the stormwater, in this case, given the consistency with my personal opinion, given the consistency with the comprehensive plan and the proximity to North Hills going from R2 to R4, with the improvement of traffic flows and the potential for additional density, I personally am in support of this project. Any other comments and questions?
Just a quick question, Chair Miller, for the applicant, are you anticipating a removal of the connection to Lassiter Mill from your property, or are you going to maintain that?
I think we're going to maintain both of them with the idea that we may in the future, but right now it's convenient. We've just seen how much busier it's gotten in the 9 years that we're there, and know that in the future, as it gets even busier, especially the sidewalk that our driveway crosses, that may be something we do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other comments and questions from the commissioners? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Chairman, I'll make a motion. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated September 12th, 2023, containing the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment for, let me get on the right,
This case,
right case.
32.
Let me start over.
Yes. Is this right? Okay, yes. For Z 3223, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated September 12th, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? And I will second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay? Just to clarify what that vote was, those in favor say aye, and also please raise your hand. 5. Those opposed, 1. So that motion passes 5-1. Thank you very much. Moving on to item D8, Comprehensive Plans Amendment CP 423 with downtown transition areas. This is a privately initiated request to amend map DT2, which would expand the designated downtown transition areas on the map near the Glenwood, Brooklyn area. The deadline for action is December 11th, 2023. And with that, I will turn to staff for a presentation from the city.
Good morning. My name is Matthew Burns with Planning and Development. As you said, CP 423 is a privately initiated request to amend map DT2, downtown transition areas. This request first appeared on the August 22nd, 2023 Planning Commission agenda, but was not discussed due to the meeting's cancellation. Since previous publications, staff has added additional information about planned BRT stations in the area. On the right, you can see existing downtown transition areas in teal. This request would expand the downtown transition areas into the red near the Glenwood, Brooklyn neighborhood. If approved, this amendment would provide Glenwood, Brooklyn neighborhood residents and property owners with additional separation from potential future development. The amendment will also change policy that guides rezoning requests with regard to land use, density, and height in the area, including ongoing transit corridor studies, planned parks, and future redevelopment opportunities. The deadline for this request is December 11th, 2023. On the left is the latest version of map DT2 taken from the comprehensive plan, showing downtown transition areas located near or partially within Raleigh's downtown core. For context, the comprehensive plan includes various policies and one action in support of transitions, buffering, and compatibility in and around downtown Raleigh. The overall purpose of these transition zones is to manage change between areas of different development intensity, which is accomplished through controls of uses, scale, height, and building materials. Specifically, policy DT 1.14 states that 1, residential density should taper to be compatible with adjacent development, and 2, non-residential uses with greater impact should be directed away from transition areas. The latter would apply to things like concentrated destination nightlife and retail, and entertainment or sports uses. This is just a picture of map DT1. In the area in white marks the extent of downtown Raleigh as defined by the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan describes various types of character preservation overlay districts. Map HV4 shows a number of neighborhoods that feature historic overlay districts, which include Glenwood, Brooklyn. Historic overlay districts, also known as HODs, are a type of zoning overlay designed to preserve the character of established neighborhoods which might contain historically significant assets and/or buildings with unique architectural styles. There are 2 types of HODs, which I'll explain in more detail on the following slide. So this map compares existing downtown transition areas and the proposed amendments area of requests with HODs located nearby. There are two types of HODs, both of which rely on a design review process to regulate building design, building materials, building heights, architectural features, landscaping, fencing, setbacks, and parking. General HODs, shown here outlined in brown, regulate 100% of all exterior changes to a lot. Some examples of neighborhoods with general HODs are Boylan Heights, Oakwood, and Prince Hall. Street side HODs, shown here outlined in orange, regulate what can be seen from the street. Glenwood, Brooklyn features a street side HOD. CP 423's area of request is divided into two separate parts. Area 1 is located along Northwest Street and comprises 31 parcels. They are bordered by Capitol Boulevard and US 70 to the east, Wade Avenue to the north, Railroad right-of-way to the west, and Peace Street to the south. Two parcels in Area 1, this one and this one, are owned by the City of Raleigh. The first, located at 1027 Northwest Street, is approximately 2.9 acres and is used by City of Raleigh Engineering Services. The second, located at 1014 Northwest Street, is approximately 13.7 acres and is the proposed location of the Smoky Hollow Park and includes the recently opened Conlon Family Skate Park. And that's that larger parcel here. Existing zoning in Area 1 is predominantly industrial mixed use and heavy industrial. These zoning districts represent a variety of uses and businesses, including offices, gyms, bars, and restaurants. The parcels between Northwest Street and the railroad tracks have depths ranging between approximately 90 and 170 feet, with a few areas as deep as 200 feet. Without assemblage, the dimensions of these lots may limit building height in this area, as they likely constrain options for structured parking. Here in the west, the railroad right-of-way varies between approximately 75 and 100 feet, effectively creating a physical barrier and physical transition area to connectivity between Glenwood, Brooklyn, and new development to the east. Unlike other neighborhoods bordered by downtown transition areas, vehicular traffic from future development will not have direct access from the east into the neighborhood. Future land use designations in the area include office and residential mixed use, all of which borders the railroad right-of-way. Central Business District, which includes 4 parcels between Capitol Boulevard and Northwest Street, and a triangular cluster of parcels at the intersection of Peace Street and West Street. Finally, public parks and open space. The large parcel owned by City of Raleigh, marked in green, which, as I mentioned, is the proposed location of the Smoky Hollow Park. Area 2 comprises 13 parcels and most of the block bordered by Peace Street, Johnson Street, West Street, and Glenwood Avenue. Current zoning in Area 2 is predominantly downtown mixed use. All of the zoning districts in Area 2 feature shopfront frontage, which is intended to create a main street type of environment around mixed-use buildings, where the highest levels of walkability are desired. Area 2 features a variety of uses and businesses, including offices, retail, bars, and restaurants. Railroad right-of-way splits this area in two. The single parcel to the east of the railroad tracks is owned by Norfolk Southern. The future land use designation in this area is Central Business District. Areas 1 and 2 are both within walking distance of the Wake BRT Northern Corridor, which is currently undergoing a major investment study. Previous planning initiatives for this corridor showed a potential BRT station at West Johnson Street and North Harrington Street, shown on the screen with a yellow star. Currently, the BRT station in this area is expected to be located along Capitol Boulevard near Peace Street. The exact location will be finalized during the next phase of the major investment study. Staff identified 11 comprehensive plan policies consistent with the request. These generally concern transitions, buffering, and compatibility. The requested amendment is considered consistent with these policies since it would facilitate tapering density and intensity between downtown Raleigh and Glenwood, Brooklyn. Staff identified 12 comprehensive plan policies inconsistent with the request. Generally, these policies encourage enhancing downtown Raleigh as a mixed-use urban center through coordination between private and public development interests. They include promoting higher density development, increasing housing variety, and encouraging more robust amenities, transit options, and public investment in downtown Raleigh. The requested amendment would introduce policy guidance for lower heights and a narrower range of uses, thereby rendering it inconsistent with these policies. There are no outstanding issues, and the deadline for action is December 11th, 2023. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to the applicant and those in favor. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. Roy Attride, Glenwood, Brooklyn neighborhood. I live at 501 Cleveland Street. We're going to talk a little bit about the background from our perspective, how we feel that this request is correcting an error in the comprehensive plan, how it does address new development challenges around our neighborhood, how the request does benefit the city as a whole, and then talk about the consistencies we see with the comprehensive plan. This was in the staff presentation, just showing the historic overlay districts in the downtown transition areas. I would note that this is the only named historic district bordering downtown that does not have a transition zone, and that's the error we would like to correct. There's a lot of discussion around the railway corridor, and so I thought I'd show a picture. It's 100 feet of dead space, so not a lot of room for a transition. It does prevent vehicular traffic, but it's not as if it gives a big transition or it's a wall or something like that. I just wanted to show a picture of how close it is to the historic neighborhood. This shows how close, or the distance that we're asking for the transition zone to begin, about 100 feet to the east towards the park, and then 60 feet to the south of our neighborhood towards Glenwood South. It also shows a scaled rendering currently on West Street. The zoning is IX12, and this shows how tall a 12-story building appears in scale to the residential neighborhood, to make sure that you all see that when we're talking about transition, that's a pretty big, dense space that could offer awesome redevelopment opportunities at 12 stories. And we're not asking to change that. We're just asking to make that the limit. Historic Glenwood Brooklyn neighborhood is about 120 years old. It's got 300 historic structures. It's got a lot of mixed use in it. We welcome mixed use. We're a downtown neighborhood, so we've had to deal with a lot of development around our neighborhood. We engage that development over the last 20 years that I've lived in the neighborhood. It is mentioned by name in the comprehensive plan in 3 separate sections, and obviously was important to the city that it be a part of our planning efforts. Again, this is the text from the comprehensive plan naming Glenwood Brooklyn neighborhood in the transition areas as a neighborhood to be protected. All other named historic neighborhoods bordering downtown have transition zones except for Glenwood Brooklyn. So this is the error that we would ask be corrected, and that Glenwood Brooklyn receive the protection as was intended by the first draft of the comprehensive plan. There are and have been additional developments in the area. We welcome those. Being a downtown neighborhood, we want intelligent and thoughtful development. We just want it to engage our neighborhood. We're not fighting to stifle growth. We love a vibrant downtown. We love the growth of our city. We like the expanding tax base, the economic impacts. We just ask that we want development that engages the historic resources, protects our neighborhood, and adds density with appropriate step downs in height towards our neighborhoods. This is a big slide, and I apologize for the wordiness. There's a huge section in the comprehensive plan about historic preservation. It meets all 7 of the themes and visions and themes for the comprehensive plan. It talks extensively about how neighborhoods are unique, scarce resources. They're distinguishable, and it also talks about the city's responsibility and commitment to protect them. And so with all the effort spent in the comprehensive plan to say that these neighborhoods need protection, that's what we're asking for, is to live up to that protection and correct the error. Neighborhoods and historic neighborhoods benefit the city as a whole. Staff mentioned that it would benefit only our neighborhood, and we don't think that's accurate. Historic neighborhoods offer opportunities for tourism, economic development. They preserve property values and stability. They provide varying housing types, and as well as remind us of our cultural heritage and identity. So they benefit the city as a whole, not just us. Height transitions also benefit the city, allowing for mixed use and housing diversity. They also allow for highest development to be in line with where infrastructure can support it. Consistency with the comprehensive plan. We found that this was consistent with 49 different policies in the comprehensive plan, 11 of those being major, 3 core definitions, 2 tables, the downtown small area plan, and the transit-oriented development guideline. Staff mentioned 12, but they ignore 2 major, all 7 of the policies around historic preservation, and 28 others. The consistencies are in a wide range across a comprehensive plan of topics, including buffering transition, but also transit and housing and economic development. Staff mentioned 12 inconsistencies, but we would refute 10 of these inconsistencies. We find it is consistent with the future land use map in that it is consistent with other transition zones for historic neighborhoods. It is consistent with the definition of the central business district. It is consistent with the recommended height designation guidelines. It is consistent with the companion plan of 3.5 land use compatibility that goes with the future land use map. There's a lot of talk about how transition zones are going to damage the ability of folks to develop density. It goes against transit development. The step down in height, as we were showing, 12 stories, can offer a significant amount of increased density in this area. It can encourage redevelopment, affordable housing, be transit-oriented, and increase compact development. We've been talking to some businesses in the area that approached us, and I think there's some good dialogue on how we can have this transition zone benefit them and their uses. We don't want to limit the uses. Glenwood South is right near us. It's a vibrant community. We want to work with them. But again, the step down into the neighborhood is really important for our protection. Transit station area recommended heights was highlighted as an inconsistency. There is a companion policy to that, talking about transition areas and how they transition down to neighborhoods. It's consistent with that one. It steps down to address neighborhoods. So saying it's inconsistent with one, but it is consistent with the other. And so 49 consistencies and 2 inconsistencies seems overwhelming to us, and a positive affirmation of how this meets policy and the needs of the comprehensive plan, the intent of the comprehensive plan. So in summary, Glenmore Brooklyn neighborhood is the only named historic neighborhood bordering downtown that does not have a transition zone, and we'd ask to correct that error. We support Raleigh businesses, our development and our growth. We just ask that it engages our neighborhood and that it's thoughtful. And we'd like to continue to work with businesses on any language that might be able to add so that they can be on the same side of the table as us for this transition zone request. Historic preservation, neighborhoods, and height transitions benefit the city as a whole. And 49 comprehensive plan policy consistencies across and only 2 inconsistencies provide a pretty overwhelming data set. Transition areas can encourage redevelopment, affordable housing, and be transit-oriented, and increase compact development. So it would meet all the needs of the comprehensive plan, or guidance of the comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With the remaining time, is there any additional public comment for those in favor of this case?
Just very briefly.
Thank you.
So some of this goes over stuff he already treaded on, which I won't tread on.
Thank you very much.
Could you state your name,
Introduce
please?
yourself. Yeah.
Of course. My name is Ben Kuhn, Kuhn. I live at 1223 Pierce Street in the Glenwood, Brooklyn neighborhood. As you can tell, this is correcting an error and oversight in the comprehensive plan. And we think that it's long overdue to be corrected. Basically, you heard some comment about, the area surrounding it that's in this area. This is supposed to be, the comment was the highest density desired in this area. And that's true as to the existing zoning. And there's an enormous amount of existing capacity in the existing zoning, in the 12-story zoning, in the 5-story zoning, in the 3-story zoning, as it's currently zoned. We welcome that to be built out to its maximum extent. We're happy for it. We also want to make sure that the businesses that are there now are allowed to remain there, and there's no impact on them from this at all. We recognize that it is a downtown neighborhood, and we interact with those businesses, and we patronize those businesses, and we want them to be there in scale. When you look at the consistent policies, and I'll conclude with this, as compared to the inconsistent policies would apply better if they were applied to a site that's directly next to a transit area or in the core of downtown. When you look at the location of this, the consistent policies are on point for a neighborhood at the edge of the downtown area, and that's what we're talking about. So our consistencies are much more germane than the inconsistencies listed by staff in their report, and I have nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Kuhn. Turning to those in opposition, those opposed to this case have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And I would ask that everyone please state their name for the record when they come up to speak as well.
Good morning, Chair and Planning Commission members. My name is Mitchell Silver. I'm a principal with McAdams and formerly the Planning Director of Raleigh and a principal author of the 2030 Comprehensive Plan. It's a pleasure to present to you this morning in opposition to CP 423. I'd have to disagree with the applicant that this change was not correcting an error. As I will share with you, it was very intentional about the evolution of Capitol Boulevard. It dated back to 2008. When there was a Big Ideas session held in Raleigh to look to transform Capitol Boulevard. Again, it started in 2008, followed by the Capitol Boulevard Corridor Plan in 2012. And as you can see from that work, there was a lot of conversation. There was a vision exercise looking at land uses listed as part of the 2012 Corridor Plan. You're seeing a huge session we held back then to start to explore from Peace all the way to the Beltline. What are the opportunities for Capitol Boulevard? And that plan, in fact, was completed, and you saw some changes with the Peace Capitol interchange, which really started to move forward some development in the area. When the comprehensive plan was conceived back in 2030, it was very important that we had a growth framework map. It centered on 8 growth centers and 12 multimodal corridors. The goal was how do we accommodate 120,000 new housing units in Raleigh by 2030. And we knew that the downtown core had to grow. That was associated with the future land use map that mirrored the growth framework map to give people certainty and predictability about how the city was going to grow. In 2008 and 2009, planning staff undertook the mapping process that was ultimately adopted by council. We looked carefully at all the sites. Not every place warranted a transition. In the case on West Street, we looked at what was now zoned as the public park, and we recognized that the west side of West Street would serve as a transition from other developments. So it was very intentional. There were a lot of meetings, and at that time, there was no opposition, and Glenwood South and other parts of Raleigh were represented in many of those meetings and conversations. We knew that downtown, as a growing city, had to expand north, south, and west, and Capitol Boulevard was part of that picture. We also wanted to make sure that we looked at return on investment as part of the comprehensive plan process. That's not the only consideration, but we knew we had to have a growing tax base in order to support growing Raleigh and keep taxes low or stable. You see what it was in 2010, and then 2030, we were envisioning light rail transit, but with BRT, those spikes will go lower, but it was part of the overall plan to grow Raleigh, and Capitol Boulevard was part of that. In terms of the origin of transitions, you may not know this, but the transition zones really came forward when residents in Cameron Park were very concerned about the idea of increasing density on Hillsborough Street. And so we brought in a special consultant to start to talk about how do we come up with this new concept called transition zones or transition areas. And then residents who lived in suburban areas close to shopping centers were also concerned about that transition. It was identified as one of the hot topics in the comprehensive plan. And so, as I said, we brought in a special advisor to help us come up with the technique. And what we came up with was transition zones. We looked at 200-foot depth, about the side of a city block, to determine how the transition would occur in that depth. There was transitioning stepping down, but also buffering between intense uses like shopping centers and residential communities. And those transition zones identified in the plan were carried forward in the code and was ultimately adopted. In terms of implementing transition zones, the plan was to remove transition zones once the comp plan amendment, once it was adopted in the code, but it was very difficult to remove that protection that the community enjoyed. And so if you look at the comprehensive plan, it does state that LU 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 were completed, which is the transition zones, as part in the comprehensive plan update. In general, it's not a good practice to have a policy which is subjective and a regulation which is objective compete with one another to offer guidance. An ordinance will always have precedent over policy, and you now see the three actions that were implemented: buffering screening requirements, interface area standards, and zoning changes to reduce conflicts. All of those associated with transition zones were in fact implemented. In terms of the downtown transition areas, they were created to address concerns about the edge of downtown and the likelihood of higher densities that would negatively impact some lower density neighborhoods. Existing transition zones are created with support of the surrounding neighborhoods, including conversations with the Glenwood, Brooklyn community. These are the existing conditions along West Street, and you can see the existing conditions of all the transition zones that surround downtown. This is the context of the area that is seeking to be amended. This is the existing context of the transition zones in the surrounding area of downtown. The process for identifying new transition zones were very clear. As part of the 2030 comp plan, it said that any recommendation for a new transition zone should be undertaken as part of an area plan. To my knowledge, the applicant did not prepare a small area plan or an area plan. So in conclusion, I believe that CP 423 should be denied. The nearest home in Glenwood, Brooklyn is more than 200 feet from the west side of West Street. The west side of West Street continues to serve as an appropriate transition between the east side of West Street and the Glenwood, Brooklyn neighborhood. The land use character of this location is industrial and commercial and is very different than the other existing transition zones. Capitol Boulevard was always intended to have high-density urban development. The land use map has remained the same since it was adopted in 2009. Transition zones are being recommended without undertaking an area plan first, and the amendment would undermine the city's ability to implement the vision for Capitol Boulevard as outlined in the corridor plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Isabel Maddox, P.O. Box 946 Raleigh. 27602. I'm here today representing JT Hobby & Sons. Here with me today is John Holmes, the CEO of Hobby. They own properties at 610, 612 Glenwood, as well as 508 West Johnson Street. Their properties are to the south of P Street, which would be affected if these downtown transition areas as requested are approved. We oppose this change and do not believe this was an oversight, as Mitch very carefully detailed the whole process of adopting the 2009, the 2030 comp plan. This was intentional. If you look at the transition areas that you see on that screen, you see that they kind of bracket certain areas, which include major transportation corridors, not just Capitol, really. It's also Glenwood, Dawson, Wilmington Street, and the new North BRT corridor. And so I think it was intentional and the railroad tracks, really importantly, it's really intentional that those areas be allowed to exist without a transition zone. This request is contrary to the comprehensive plan. It would restrict height and uses. It's contrary to current zoning, recent zoning cases which have been approved in this area, and it would cause problems for the proposed North BRT corridor. And for the areas south of Peace, it's important to think about the topo there. As you know, as you drive across Peace Street, you drop down quite a bit. So the height in Glenwood South is not going to have any impact on Glenwood Brooklyn. Even if it was appropriate to adopt this request north of Peace, it certainly is not appropriate to adopt it south of Peace. And I think importantly, this would really impact the future development prospects of these properties on the south side. We don't believe that any restrictions on development there on the south side of Peace would have any impact on Glenwood Brooklyn, which is up the hill and a good distance away and separated by a major corridor of Peace Street. That's all I've got, and any questions I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bringing this back to the table, are there any questions or comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Fox.
So I just want to be clear, the 2030 comprehensive plan was adopted in 2009, correct? And at what time was the Glenwood Brooklyn street side HOD created? Is that approximately 2016? That's correct? Okay, so it did not exist at the time that the comp plan was created?
I'm not sure.
No, it did not.
It did not, okay.
The local district did not.
Correct, okay. And that was not part of the conversation at that time to go through an area planning process to create an additional transition, correct?
Based on Mr. Silver's comments, no.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted clarity. Also, I believe you stated this in your presentation, but in the Area 1, we're not able to actually walk from that area into the neighborhood. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's separated by railroad right-of-way, and there are some street stubs going from Glenwood, Brooklyn that stop at that right-of-way.
Okay. And all of the other transition areas, you are able to walk directly into an adjacent neighborhood?
I can't speak for all of them, but many of them, yes, you can walk through.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers my questions.
Thank you. Other comments and questions from the commissioners?
Yeah, I have a question about the railroad right-of-way. So it says, and this would be in Zone 1, it says tracks have depths ranging from 90 to 170 feet. Looking at transition areas, I believe I'm looking at the right thing, in the UDO, where Zone A and Zone B are the two use-restricted pieces of a transition. Does those buffers, is that included in the railroad right-of-way, or do you have to add that in addition once the railroad's right-of-way stops? Does that make sense?
So neighborhood transitions would not apply here to parcels that front on West Street because they're not adjacent to residentially zoned parcels. The railroad right-of-way removes that requirement.
Okay. So the use restricted zones in a neighborhood transition do not apply to this at all?
That's right.
Okay. So I guess my second part of that question is, I'm just trying to understand better how this transition would restrict uses and heights back from where the railroad right-of-way ends.
So this isn't a regulatory change, it's a policy change that they're requesting. What you're talking about, the neighborhood transitions
Yeah.
in the Unified Development Ordinance are regulatory transition requirements. So what this is setting up is a policy that would guide decisions for rezonings that the Planning Commission considers in the future, would set up policy that would suggest that you would expect to see conditions or some other acknowledgement in the rezoning request of how the request was managing height in this area.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
But it is policy and not regulatory.
Purely, so none of that part of the UDO would apply to what we would,
Well,
to this amendment.
The UDO is going to apply to whatever's developed in the city, right? But the zoning request is going to determine which aspects of the code apply and more, right? The zoning is always going to be more specific. 99 out of 100 times it's going to be more specific with more restrictive regulation than what the code requires.
Okay.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Bennett.
Bynum, could you repeat what you just said, if you can remember, about how this would change how we look at future rezonings?
It would set up a situation where you would expect to see some sort of acknowledgement in the rezoning request, either in how they designate base district or offer conditions that manage height.
Okay. Mr. Silver said, I was trying to jot down my notes, that the current transition zones are about 200 feet. So does the Glenwood Brooklyn neighborhood currently have that 200 foot with the railroad and the street there?
So the railroad right-of-way ranges, let me pull up what I had written about that. Give me 1 second. So, the railroad right-of-way varies between 75 and 100 feet, and the depths of the parcels that are between Northwest Street and the railroad tracks, so everything on the west side, range between 90 and 170 feet, going up to 200 in some cases. So there is effectively a physical right-of-way barrier between the neighborhood as it stands right now and those parcels along the west side of West Street.
Okay, that answers my question.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners?
No, I just wanted to reiterate another piece of Mr. Silver's presentation. There is pretty clear direction that transition zones are the result of an area planning process, and this did not go through that process. And so for that reason, I'm not in support.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I would agree with Commissioner Fox's statement. It seems like the inconsistency of high density development, transit access, compact development is essential as part of this Capitol Avenue vision. So I would, along that with the lack of an area plan, I would also not support this amendment.
Thank you. Other comments, Commissioner Bennett?
Yes, so I agree with Commissioner Fox and Raines. particularly about it not following the process that's recommended. I comment a lot, and sometimes I vote in opposition of rezonings simply because perhaps a plan has been recommended that's not been done, or a plan is underway that's not complete. So I try to be consistent in my thinking and my voting. It also feels to me like if the transition area is there, by way of the railroad right-of-way and the setbacks, that we would be treating this neighborhood different from other neighborhoods. And I am a big proponent of treating neighborhoods equitably. And I've had considerable heartburn lately over some of our rezonings because we had height going right up against neighborhoods that didn't have the benefit of these transition areas. And so I'm not in favor of treating certain neighborhoods different from others. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Is there a process of notification of the property owners that are affected by this, and they were all sent notification? And didn't see many comments. I guess we must not have had too many. Or am I missing them in the report?
We did receive a number of emails. I know that
I've received some emails as well. I was just looking in the report.
Yeah, this was not put in the engagement portal.
Okay, thank you.
I see. That makes sense. Any other comments from the commissioners? With that, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Fox?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend denial of CP 423 as it is not reasonable nor in the public interest and is in conflict with a number of existing policies in the comprehensive plan, notably coordinating transportation investments with land use.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Bennett has offered a second. Any further discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? By show of hands, all those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes 6-0. Thank you very much. Moving on to item D4, rezoning case Z8421 at 209 East Millbrook Road. This case is to rezone approximately 13.35 acres from R6 to RX3. The deadline for action is November 11th. We will now turn to Sarah Shaughnessy for a presentation from City Planning staff.
Thank you. So this is a request to rezone a little over 13 acres to residential mixed use 3 stories. Your deadline for action is November 11th. The zoning in the area is predominantly residential 4, commercial mixed use, and office mixed use. Looking at a higher level at the site, so as you can see, residential surrounding the area with some commercial along Six Forks at the intersection of Six Forks and Millbrook. It is also close to Sanderson High School and Green Elementary School. Some views of the site, so that's Burnley Place looking north into the subdivision, which is part of the rezoning application. Looking across Millbrook Road to the south at the commercial shopping center across the street, looking west on Millbrook Road towards Six Forks, and then Tralee Place looking south. So you can see that subdivision that is, or the development that is part of the rezoning on the other side of Millbrook is to the right in the image there. So looking at the existing versus the proposed zoning, the existing zoning is R6. Which allows up to 144 units, does not permit office or retail. Under the proposed zoning, up to about 150 additional units would be permitted, as well as limited office and retail uses. The site has a higher walk score, a lower bike score, and a slightly higher transit score than average, with lower overall transportation costs and a better access to jobs. The site is served by 2 existing Go Raleigh routes. The site or proposed zoning does not include any subsidized housing units, but as mentioned earlier, would potentially add to the housing supply and allow for a variety of housing types. Some information about the demographics and land use history for this site. There is a lower percentage of residents of color in this area, a lower percentage of low-income households. And then, as the staff report notes, there are several subdivisions that were subject to restrictive covenants that limited use and dictated lot sizes. The requested RX3 is consistent with the future land use map designation of medium-scale residential. No frontage is proposed as part of this request. The urban form map does designate part of Millbrook as an urban thoroughfare, which partially goes through this site. The whole part of Millbrook that the site fronts is not designated as an urban thoroughfare, just that westernmost part of it. It is consistent, this request is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall, again, consistent with the future land use map, inconsistent with the urban form map because of that partial designation, but a minor inconsistency. A number of consistent policies here, the frontage policy being the inconsistent policy in this case. Again, your deadline for action is November 11th. There are no outstanding issues.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to the applicant. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
How do I advance the slides? Just click here. Terrific. Thank you again, Sarah. Thank you for hearing the case. My name is Seth Wolfman. I'm the president of Wolf Multifamily Investments. My wife and myself are owners of these 2 properties. We've owned them since 2021. Quick company overview about our company. We own 9 affordable and well-priced housing communities in the state of North Carolina, including these 2 communities, Colony Townhomes and Midtown Townhomes. And our rezoning request is in an effort to add 4 one-bedroom apartments to our 2 communities. So these 2 properties sit on either side of Millbrook. We've identified during our acquisition process some unused space within the properties, and we've had strong demand for our apartments, and we'd like to utilize that additional space to create 3 one-bedrooms within Colony, and we have no plans for making any changes beyond that in any of the structures or any of the frontage. And in the case, you can see a picture here. This is some of the unused space within the community. And this is a sample, some preliminary drawings that we received, 2 front doors and 3 windows for a similar one-bedroom. Midtown, which is across the street, we have a leasing office there that we currently don't use because we own the 2 neighboring communities. We use 1 leasing office at Colony. Again, given the demand that we have for apartments in this space, we thought we'd utilize that space as a 2-level, one-bedroom apartment there as well. Again, no change for any plans in any of the other structures around the site. And that's a photo of the leasing office. These were just some comments that we made during the meetings that we've had with neighbors. No plan to change any structures, remove any structures. We did hear some feedback from some residents. They wanted to know if there were going to be any changes. We assured them that that wasn't the case. We also showed them where the parking, which already exists on the site for these 4 units, would be. And we believe that we've satisfied any residential concerns for our existing residents. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. With the remaining time, are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, moving on to those opposed. Those opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
I'm Carl Dawson. Out of full disclosure, I'm not here offering any professional engineering services. I let my license retire in January the 1st. I began my career with the city in 1988 as city traffic engineer, then as city engineer, and then retired in 2014 as public works director. I've got 35 years of engineering experience. But what I'm going to be offering to you right now is not engineering experience, it's observations. Rezoning this property to RX3, R3X, what you're doing right now is approving a zoning designation. You're not approving a plan. This property owner paid $16.5 million for these two pieces of property. And I'll be honest with you, the use on the property is not the highest and best use. And while he says he's not required to do that. I have three areas of concerns with the rezoning. I mean, I'm not a NIMBY. I'm not at all. If it was upgraded, it would be fine with me, but there are some concerns about upgrading it. One is access. There are 6 commercial drives and 2 public streets between the property line and Six Forks Road along Millbrook Road. Millbrook Road and Six Forks operates at level of service F. If you've ever been out to Colony Shopping Center and tried to get in and out of there, the signal queues back up past the shopping center routinely. These driveways are full movement driveways. They're basically useless as anything but right-ins and right-outs. He can go from 118 units to 396 units on the property with this land use unconditional. So in other words, can generate basically 4 times the amount of traffic off this property that's currently generated. And I did find some solace in listening, talking to staff and find out that he would end up having to derive access to the property opposite Raleigh with was it Avenue Boulevard or something like that, Bradley? With an 81-foot right-of-way. The problem is there are just so many access points there. It's a congested mess. And at Sedgefield Drive, if you look at the cul-de-sac at the end of Sedgefield Drive, that cul-de-sac is entirely inside the proposed rezoning property. I expect if you'll go back and look at the zoning for those apartments, there was a commitment made that there not be any access to Sedgefield Drive through the apartments. My concern is not so much the access to Sedgefield Drive as it is the alignment of Millbrook Road at the intersection of Sedgefield and Millbrook. There's a vertical curve there and there's a horizontal curve there, and the intersection sight distance there is awful. And if you start running apartment traffic through that cul-de-sac to that intersection, you're going to introduce some problems. So those are my access concerns. The other concern I had is buffering. The existing apartments are about 15 feet above the street level on Burkwood. There's a significant elevation difference. And if he's under R3X, RX3, he's allowed an additional story of height on that property. There's a pretty full tree canopy right now between the residential area on Burkwood and the existing apartments. And I can't tell you from a windshield observation whether it's on his property or on the property behind it. But many of the neighbors have privacy fences back there, and the tree canopy's outside those privacy fences. It's between the 2 privacy fences. And it would be important to maintain that canopy, to maintain the privacy to those residences on Burkwood Lane. The third concern is stormwater. And if maximum density is achieved on this site, we need some assurances that stormwater is going to be handled such that it doesn't increase stormwater runoff to the surrounding areas, that it's controlled so that the rate of runoff is not larger than what's there now. I'm not here as a NIMBY. I really am not. An upgrade to that property won't bother me a bit as long as it's done the right way. Now, I will say we're not interested in being North Hills 2. But just an upgrade is fine. But there's some considerations that need to be given to those upgrades. And if he does his 2 units, that's fine too, as far as I'm concerned. But there could still be some additional privacy fence put along that backside, separating the subdivision from where he intends to put his 2 units. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Denise Rhodes. My husband, James Crabtree, and I live at 228 East Millbrook, which directly is beside the proposed area, turning from this area that's been blocked off. However, we received a map in the mail that, if it could be pulled up, I don't know, that also includes our property, our home that we bought 16 years ago, which is right next to I guess it's 209 East Millbrook Road, which currently has a buffer of trees and is used by the apartment complex as a dog walk area. And so it's green and, I don't know, 50 feet maybe deep. I'm very, very concerned that the addition of our property in there, change for rezoning, is going to affect us and the rest of our lives. We have owned that property for 16 plus years and have no intention of moving. We would like to stay there. It is a 1-story house and we're beginning to age and we would like to stay there. And we're concerned that, especially as I've learned today, I did not realize that it's a lot more than what he originally stated in neighborhood meetings. It's no longer 12.9 acres, it's 13.35 acres, and we are concerned that that is including our property now in the rezoning. We're concerned for that. Why do we have to have our home as mixed use residential? And I'm concerned about the number of apartments that I've learned today from what it is to almost double. And I'm shadow and agree with everything the former speaker said regarding density and high traffic at 228 being the first house after the apartment complex. We do see traffic line up from Six Forks Road to our driveway. It's very difficult for us to get in and out of our driveway without someone almost hitting our rear end as we're slowing down. So it's already a high traffic area. Speaking as a resident, I'm strongly opposed to this.
Thank you, ma'am. Could you clarify, I'm sorry, I didn't get it, your address again?
228 East Millbrook Road.
Okay, and could you clarify are you renting in that location? Or
we own the property. Been
You're
there
the owner.
16 plus years.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Paul Flanagan. I live on Wendell Drive. I rise in objection to this project on a number of grounds, principally notification. 1, notification was insufficient by way of placard on Wendell Drive about this project. 2, the staff report published online. The slide deck differed from what was presented here this morning. At 8:55 this morning, the slide deck was different than what was presented. 3, The information presented does not discuss extensions of the urban
Thank you. Without
thoroughfare.
objection, I would like to add some additional time. I know that I asked questions to the last applicant that took some of, or the last speaker that took some time. I'd like to add another minute.
Thank you.
For you to finish your time. Thank you.
The information presented does not discuss the extension of the urban thoroughfare or the impact of redevelopment on the future street alignment or extension, and the impact of said development on the traffic and community quality of Wendell Drive. In addition, any variance that would be requested and likely granted will impact the neighborhood quality of homes to the north, west, and south of requested rezoning area. I'd also like to make mention of the fact that in the publication here today, as far as the agenda, this property is listed as Millbrook Road on the north and south sides and 300 feet east of Falls in the Noose Road. So with these factual inaccuracies, I would ask that the committee reconsider this matter at this time and deny. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Bringing this back to the table, I expect we'll have a number of questions. I wanted to, just a question of clarification for staff. Does this rezoning request, in fact, include parcel 228 at East Millbrook Road?
No, it does not.
Okay.
It includes the two parcels that are mapped. I think some of the confusion stemmed from in the zoning map that staff create that's included in our presentations. It is also included in neighborhood notice. We make an extra bold line to identify the property. I think there was some confusion with the overlap of that bold line and Ms. Rhodes's property. I think she also mentioned two different acreages. I think that discrepancy is from in the map because of the way the methodology for creating the maps and then populating that information. Some of the road area is included in that acreage rather than just the sites. So that's the difference. But it's just the two properties that are listed.
Thank you. And is any portion of the property with the requested rezoning not owned by the applicant?
No.
Okay. Thank you. And then two other procedural questions to follow up from staff. One is with respect to notice in the agenda. Did that notice change between when it was originally posted on Thursday, I believe it was, to how it appears today? And is there an issue with that?
So the notice has not changed. I think the speaker noted some changes to the presentation. We include those presentations as backup in the agenda. We publish that a week in advance. I did make some corrections to that presentation before I brought it to you today.
Understood. Thank you. And then also with respect to notice on Wendell Drive, has that issue been reviewed by staff?
So we are required to mail notice to residents within 500 feet of the property and then post notice at the site. That has been done.
Okay. Thank you very much. Then bring it back to the table for additional questions and comments from the commissioners. Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I'd like a clarification from the applicant, please. Could you review exactly what improvements you're intending to make and why the rezoning is required to be able to make those?
Sure. What we learned after acquisition was that we were constrained by our ability to create those extra 4 units by the current zoning. And when we approached the city about it, we went through the 2030 plan, and we were advised that we should make a request which is consistent with that 2030 plan. At that same time, we found out about changes to Millbrook Road and different things which were already in the works to increase the size of that roadway, make way for additional traffic in anticipation of activity on Six Forks Road. So we're making that request now to build these 4 additional units because, as I mentioned, we're constrained by our current zoning.
Do you know if the current zoning is it the units per acre or the impervious surface? What element of the zoning is holding you back?
I believe it's the units per acre. I believe we're R6, which means we can do 6 units per acre. At 13, we're just shy.
Okay, thank you.
The building type is also not allowed in their current district.
And could you review again, please, the improvements you intend to make?
Sure. There are 3 already existing structures on the site. One is a leasing center, which we plan to modify as a 2-story, 1-bedroom apartment. And then there are 2 neighboring pre-existing buildings, brick buildings, that are currently used for a combination of storage and a variety of other things, I believe, from the original developer. And all we're talking about doing is repurposing those as 1-bedroom apartments.
Thank you. And if I may continue, Chair Miller.
Please.
This is a question for staff, so thank you. Will that level of development, do we know what kind of, will that require street improvements? What tier of site plan would that require?
I'm going to defer to my transportation colleagues here.
Good morning, Monique Guyant with Transportation. So for the street improvements that are outlined with having frontage on Millbrook, that would align with the Tier 3 subdivision.
Does planning staff have any opinion on whether this improvement of existing structures would require tier 1, 2, or 3? Do you know where we would land?
Can you advise on that?
I don't know. We could do some research about that. I can't answer that off the top of my head. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. If this case gets deferred, I would appreciate a follow-up on that. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners?
Yeah, I just want to comment that this appears to be, multifamily, affordable housing, existing affordable housing that's highly walkable. I think it's the exact kind of development we need to be protecting in Raleigh at all costs, to be honest. So,
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Miller. A question for, I think, transportation. The connection, I'm looking at the map. There's Raleigh, and then there's Sedgefield. Is there something in the future road plan that actually connects those two for connections to relieve some pressure from that area if it does go to a more dense apartment type building?
Monique Guyant with Transportation again. So for the connection for Raleigh and Sedgefield, with a higher, like a Tier 3 subdivision plan, that connection would be expected to be made. That's supported by our comprehensive plan and also our UDO.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Bennett.
First, I'm trying to get clarity on the last speaker's comment about notification on window. I'm not quite sure what he was stating. Did you not receive notice and you should have?
So I apologize. You are forcing my microphone for you. So as it relates to notification, there is no on-street placard notifying the zoning hearing. I did receive in the mail a notification, but I do not use Millbrook Road, and if I had not been diligent, or my wife had not been diligent as far as reviewing the mail, I would have missed a notification about this hearing. And so what I consider to be staff oversights or omissions are significant, as they may have impacted other individuals who were not here and did not realize this meeting was occurring.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not opposed to what the applicant is suggesting that he would like to do. My concern is that this appears to be naturally occurring affordable housing, and I have concerns about rezoning naturally occurring affordable housing in the event that it is redeveloped, because those residents will likely be displaced and find it very challenging to find housing at the cost at the rent they're paying in an area with the amenities of Millbrook and Six Forks. I don't know if there are conditions, if we are even allowed to add conditions that would somehow give existing residents some sort of priority in returning to a new development, should a new development be done, if the applicant were interested in doing that. But I think should the property be redeveloped, and that is an option if this is rezoned, there needs to be some sort of consideration for the residents that would be displaced and challenged with finding housing for this rent in an area like this.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to respond to that comment? Have you considered providing any additional consideration in the event that this is redeveloped as a whole?
We haven't even contemplated that because we don't have development capabilities and we have no intention in the near term of redeveloping the site. If we would absolutely be willing to contemplate that and put in some kind of a condition if that would be something that would be required for us to consider should at some point in the future we redevelop the space. Would be absolutely something we'd be open to. We don't have that capability. I'm not a developer. We're an apartment owner-operator.
Thank you. Any specific ideas about types of considerations you might be considering? Considerations you're considering?
I would defer to staff for specific language, but just what would make me feel better would be if there were some sort of, should this property be redeveloped for new apartments or whatever, could there be a condition, David, I'll ask you, could there be a condition from an applicant to say, we are going to give priority to existing applicants to apply for the new development or something? That's what I'm thinking about, because it's not likely to be affordable.
I was going to say the more likely conditions, the conditions that we have accepted in the past where you have existing affordable housing and there's the opportunity for redevelopment have been primarily notice, an extended notice to provide the current applicants or the current residents at the time of redevelopment, giving them additional time to find alternative housing because it's just not as available as market rate housing. And so we have accepted zoning conditions and we could provide the applicant with language where it's extended notification for terminating leases because the property the buildings have to be removed in order to redevelop it and so forth. I'm trying to think if we've accepted other conditions. Relocation assistance. I think those are two conditions we've accepted that we could provide sample language to the applicant.
Okay.
Thank you. Is that something that the applicant would consider, either providing an extended notice period or and relocation assistance to existing residents in the event that the property is redeveloped?
Yes to both.
Thank you.
It doesn't help them stay there.
If I may suggest an alternative,
Okay.
I would put forward that perhaps a condition limiting development to the current number of units and heights that exist on the plot would remove the financial incentive to redevelop this. And if it was ever needed, it could be rezoned in the future and would allow the flexibility to make the improvements that you're looking at now. And then you wouldn't be as constrained down the road for having to provide assistance in other ways that you might not be capable of or set up to do organizationally.
Other thoughts from the commissioners?
Was just thinking about this. Didn't council run into this recently with Clover Lanes rezoning? And didn't they offer a condition? I can't remember the exact wording, but I thought there was a condition that had a little more meat to it. It was like financial something, some kind of
Right, there was
payment
additional,
to-
there's a longer notice period and relocation assistance.
relocation assistance.
Yeah, which is
and-
what we
yeah,
were just talking about.
Yeah. Good.
Yep. Mhm.
Other comments from the commissioners?
So it seems like there is no condition to help preserve, well, A, naturally occurring affordable housing, or B, to help keep the existing residents there, should they want to stay. Or should they, to prioritize them, because relocation assistance helps them leave. Additional notice gives them a longer time to leave. I'm interested in people who want to stay being able to stay. There has to be some sort of word. Maybe we haven't done it before, but there has to be something that or an applicant, I guess we can't make you, but there has to be some sort of wording to, if it's as simple as they'll just be prioritized in the application process or something. I'm not interested in helping them leave if they don't want to leave. For the people who want to stay, I'm trying to see how they have some sort of priority in staying. Maybe it can't be done, but I feel like it can be.
Any additional thoughts from staff on that issue? Or just to clarify the question, are you, there would in the event it's redeveloped and it's torn down, there would be that interim period where they would have to find other housing during the construction period. Are you referring to after the construction is complete, that they get to come back, or that those units would not be changed at all?
Yes.
Okay.
Those who want to. I mean, some may be happy
Gotcha.
to move out to Johnston County, but some people may want to be able to remain in this area, not too far from North Hills and with transit, and it's walkable. And what is most likely to happen is if it should get redeveloped, the rents are going to be a lot higher than what they are now. So what I'm asking is there some sort of assistance? I'm not saying like vouchers or anything, but some sort of just prioritization. Existing residents would have priority to return in the application process over people applying from the outside.
Yeah, I would absolutely support something like that. It's hard for me to put language around it because we haven't envisioned that future date, not thinking about redeveloping the space right now. But we can definitely do that. What would that look like from your perspective that would give them that priority?
You go.
Commissioner Fox?
It's almost as if you're describing a first right of refusal, which is often in for sale property. It's a question for Mr. York, can that be included in conditional language?
Well, that's the thing. Before the applicant spoke, I was going to say the applicant's free to, present draft conditions to us for us to look at. My concern is the ability for staff to track it and enforce it. Our zoning conditions that we have reporting requirements and things of that nature with ones that are more problematic to enforce. And so I would need to see, we haven't had one of those conditions to my knowledge. And so I need to see proposed wording to see if we could find a way to fine tune it so that it was something that was legal and enforceable by the city. I wouldn't want to try to come up with that language right now off the cuff, but
And
if they
I
want
have
to
a
propose it, I'm happy to.
Follow-up question
review
as
it.
well. Commissioner Bennett just jogged my memory when you said something. And I believe we've talked about this before. Can a condition be included where an applicant offers to take vouchers in the future, makes a commitment in conditional language?
I think they can offer that up as a zoning condition.
Okay. I think that's the way to do it.
Thank you. Commissioner Otwell?
Thank you, Chair Miller. I do think that limiting the current form to what it is in the event of a redevelopment takes away the financial incentive to redevelop in the first place, so the people would get to stay. And if that was insufficient, you could consider a condition that required an equal number of affordable housing units to be included in any redevelopment, which would also provide similar kind of housing.
But we can't require that, right?
We can ask for it see if they would be willing to give it to us as a condition.
If I could just say one thing, in being here since 9 o'clock, I've heard some feedback about the consistency about the application of some of the 2030 plans. And while I have absolutely no intention of redeveloping the property, it would seem to me that the consistency, which is outlined in the 2030 plan, doesn't make these additional requests and specifications. I'm offering them up because I believe it's in the best interest for me and in the best interest for the city. So I would just ask that we apply that same approach in terms of its consistency when we're dealing with this, especially because in hearing about the other example about Clover Lane, I'm aware of that property. I'm not aware of what the decisions have been, but it is a townhome property that is in a well-located area, and I'm not sure about what their plans are, but I can assure you what my plans are. And it sounds like these restrictions weren't imposed on them.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners?
I'll just add that I appreciate your comment. I had similar comments on Clover Lane, and I think, don't quote me, I actually voted against that one because I wasn't comfortable with what might happen to the residents. So I do appreciate your comment about being consistent. I do try to be consistent. So I have these comments about all rezonings of naturally occurring affordable housing. So I just want to assure you I'm being consistent. And I'm not interested in denying your request. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out a way to preserve the existing residents' ability to remain in, as you said, a well-located area. That's my primary concern. I don't have other issues with what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other comments?
Thank you.
I do have a question for staff. And Bonham, you mentioned that the use was non-conforming, but it is R6, and I just want to understand that more because it looks like it's R6, and this would be a townhome, right? Which is allowable under R6.
I believe these are apartments. Are they not apartments?
They're townhome
They're towns. And it looks like there's 120 units there and 144 are currently allowable from the staff report. And this would be adding 4 more.
So, yeah, the existing zoning, if it were developed to its full entitlement potential, the maximum number of units allowable, I think in the staff report was 144. That's the number that's reported. Under the proposed zoning, a lot more could be developed, up to 150 more, approximately. I think the applicant is just requesting the rezoning to develop 4 additional units, to clarify.
Thank you. And I think I just want to understand that more because I just want to understand why developing those 4 more wouldn't be allowable under the current zoning. And I'm sure y'all know, staff knows better than me, but just from looking at the report, it seems like it would be.
I'm not privy to the conversation the applicants had with staff on their proposed expansion. If either of the 2 new areas where they would be providing dwellings were considered to be apartment buildings as opposed to townhouses, the apartment building type is not permitted in R6. And so that would be my only guess, and that's all it is a guess as to why the current zoning wouldn't allow the expansion they want. But I haven't been a party to that.
That was my understanding, was that if we had a different type of structure there, we would be able to do this.
Thank you. Other questions from the commissioners? Thank you. I would, so I think, it sounds like we're going to hold this at the table. I know that it's an ongoing policy issue we face regularly when there has been naturally existing and occurring affordable housing. If a property owner has been providing that for some time, are they going to be held to that forever versus allowing those cases to develop their properties and sort of with what conditions? That's something that has certainly been ongoing throughout the city for a while. It sounds like there are 2 and potentially 3 additional conditions that the applicant is willing to offer related to, in the event of a redevelopment that reaches some threshold, and staff can work on the language with the applicant, that the applicant would be willing to provide, excuse me, the extended notice period, relocation assistance, and that staff will also review the possibility of adding in a condition for providing a right of first refusal with respect to renting the new units at the then market rate. Thank you. So without objection, any other comments from the table? Without objection, I would defer this case. Is the applicant available to provide those new conditions by this Friday? If so, we could move this to the immediate next meeting, which is September 26th. But if not, the deadline for action on this case is, let's see, November 11th. So if you can't get it in by this Friday, there would be additional time for us to continue this case to a meeting beyond September 26th and still meet the deadline. We'll try for this Friday. So should I go ahead and notice when this is moved to? Okay. In that case, we will move this case to the September 26th meeting. Planning Commission meeting. Thank you very much. Moving on to item D5, this is rezoning case Z1323, which is 3 parcels along Mitchell Mill Road. This case is to rezone approximately 35.83 acres from R4 to Wake County and Wake County R30 to R6 conditional use, and the deadline for action is November 11th.
All right, good morning. Bronwyn Reedus with Planning and Development. Next on the agenda is rezoning Z1323. Request to rezone approximately 35 acres along Watkins Road from R4 and Wake County R30 to a consistent R6 conditional use. Your deadline for action is November 11th. Zoning in the area is predominantly residential. The surrounding areas, as you can see to the west of Watkins Road, those are in the city's planning jurisdiction. Surrounding zoning would be majority R4. And then on the east side of Watkins Road, that's more of the county's jurisdiction, and that's where you see the R30. The properties that are included in the rezoning request that are shown in the yellow, those are in the city's ETJ today. And what's shown in the white, that's in the city's short-range urban service area today. So an aerial image showing the surrounding areas of the site. You can see the difference here of like the city existing zoning and the county's existing zoning, but mostly surrounding uses would be single family detached dwellings. The Wake Crossroads Lake is directly north of the site. The nearest grocery store is about 2 miles away, and there is some existing commercial uses. I think there's some fueling stations with convenience stores and maybe a Family Dollar about a mile around Mitchell Mill Road. Here are some views of the site. There is an existing single-family dwelling on the site constructed in the 1960s. The applicant has provided two zoning conditions, the first to prohibit cemeteries, the second to provide a trip budget with a AM peak hour of 140 total trips and a PM peak hour of 153 total trips. Based on staff analysis, the estimated increase in entitlement that would come with the proposed rezoning request is from a total of 55 units that could be built today to a projected 287 units. And this does account for the proposed trip budget. So on all of our kind of transportation multimodal indicators, the site does score lower than the citywide average. That leads us to believe that development on this site would not necessarily advance the plan's goals for connected, walkable, and energy efficient development. Just to kind of reiterate that, you can see here that the nearest transit stop is about 3 miles away from the site, not reasonably accessible on foot or on bike. The request does add to the housing supply. It does add for smaller lots than is currently provided today. It allows for different variety of housing types than what would be allowed today, but it doesn't include any subsidized units, and again, it's not close to transit. The area overall is wealthier and less diverse than the city-wide average, and most of the households in this area are owner-occupied. The request of R6 is consistent with the future land use designation of low-scale residential. I'll point out, you can see the dotted or dashed line here on the map. This is showing the boundary of the Northeast Special Study Area. This is an area slated for further and focused land use study. We do have that in our budget to begin work on that special study area this year. We're expecting to publish a request for qualifications at the end of this year, hoping to get started on that. We wouldn't expect to be done with that study, however, probably until the summer of 2025. So though the request is consistent with the future land use map, it is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan overall. Consistent policies are listed here. Again, the future land use map, the conditions provided are consistent with the future land use map as well. Zoning for housing, consistent. And then infrastructure concurrency is noted here as consistent. This is specific to water, sewer, and stormwater. So all of those are existing in the area. And then going into inconsistent policies, most of these are flagged due to the location of the NESA Northeast Special Study Area boundary. A lot of these policies speak to the nature and the timing of growth in our ETJ and our urban service areas. And then the zoning and infrastructure impacts policy is being flagged because of fire response time insufficiencies in the area. There are no outstanding issues with the petition, and your deadline for action again is November 11th. Can I answer any questions?
Thank you. We will now move on to the applicant. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Members of the Planning Commission, Samuel Morris with Longleaf Law Partners, 4509 Creedmoor Road, Suite 302. here on behalf of the applicant. I'm joined this morning by Andrew Soriano with Deacon Development. And we are here, my thing has disappeared. Okay. We are here today requesting the rezoning of 3 parcels located at 4209, 4217, and the larger parcel being 0 Watkins Road from its existing county R30 designation, as well as it's missing, there are 2 of those 3 parcels are R4, seeking to rezone those to R6 under the City of Raleigh's zoning jurisdiction. Here's a look at the approximately 30-acre site. Bronwyn just walked you through the kind of general location, located along Watkins Road, south of Mitchell Mill, and also located immediately south of the Wake Crossroads Lake. Current zoning is that mix of R30, which is the brighter yellow, and then the R4, which is the lighter yellow. And this also, serves as a kind of delineation between or of where the City of Raleigh's ETJ is located. And as you can see, substantial portion of located southwest of Watkins Road has been annexed and is located within the ETJ, as well as the lake itself and lands moving to the northeast. Future land use map is low-scale residential with a little bit of that kind of open space designation. We are requesting R6, which is consistent with the low scale, and I'll just note that that area along the pond is subject to riparian buffers. There's also a sewer easement running along there, so the kind of open space designated areas will be left as open space. There's also TCA requirements on a lot of this size, and the UDO requires that you prioritize locations along riparian buffers for TCA. So yeah, that entire darker green area will be left kind of in its current state. Here is a look at the city's existing corporate boundaries. We're adjacent to existing corporate boundaries on 2 sides, obviously right across Watkins Road, and then also this parcel here was recently annexed by the City of Raleigh at the end of 2022, and there is a subdivision underway for single-family development on that lot. And I'll point out too, this lot was developed and has been within the city's corporate jurisdiction since the 90s, being served by water, sewer, et cetera, since that time. And just to kind of take a step back and look at where this parcel is in location to the broader the city, this northeastern portion of the city. Obviously, everything you see colored is the city's planning jurisdiction. This kind of the difference is this more muted shade of yellow are areas that have been annexed. So the lighter yellow is, like you see here, wells and stuff, that's under the county. But those like this, all these lighter shades, those are all areas that have been annexed. And of course, we're located down here. And so, yeah, just to touch on the comments regarding kind of like timing of this development, the area study that's kind of underway or soon to be underway. Yeah, this site is served by water and sewer and has been since the early 90s. There's water running along Watkins Road. All the green you see is sewer that has already been acquired, developed, all through capital funding from the City of Raleigh in the 1990s. So pretty much what we're looking at is the edge of the corporate and planning jurisdiction, and hasn't really moved since that time. The city has grown a lot since the 90s, and this line hasn't really changed, as you hear that the city's kind of finally coming around on an area study to expand these corporate or at least planning jurisdictional boundaries. But just wanted to point out that this subdivision, some subdivisions surrounding, as well as like major capital improvement projects, were done in the 90s and early 2000s. So there's been a vision for growth in this area for a long time. It just hasn't happened as quickly as it was visioned back then. Therefore, we think that this request is consistent overall with the pace and pattern of development in the area. And as you heard, it is consistent with the low-scale future land use designation. Again, we think that the inconsistencies identified are more technical in nature, and being the fact that we fall just outside of that ETJ boundary, and think it's also worth noting that we are surrounded by ETJ on nearly all sides. In particular, if you take a step back at this to really show you that there's substantial portions of the city that are planned for zoning and that are either planned to be serviced or are existing. I should say, this has been existing service is being provided here and has been since the 90s, and this is being developed right now. So new services are going to be extended and provided to that site over the coming years. So we think we're extremely well positioned when it comes to city services. So just wanted to address those inconsistencies, but overall do believe that we're consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan, and happy to take any questions that you all have. Thank you, and I'd like to reserve any remaining time for rebuttal.
Thank you. Any other comments from those in support of this project? Seeing none, we'll move to those opposed. Those opposed to this case have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Seeing none, I will bring this back to the table. Questions and comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Rains, Vice Chair Rains, excuse me.
Thanks, Chair Miller. Just a question for the staff. There's been on the report comments about emergency services and some limitations in terms of timing for that capability. Can you expand on that? Can you talk about what the variation is?
Yes, so there are some national standards that our fire department uses. I don't think we have anyone from fire here today. But the insufficiency, I think specifically, is flagged here for the arrival of a second deployment in the event of a fire emergency, and then a full deployment. And so those are some timing insufficiencies. The nearest fire station to this site only has one engine. So in the event of ever needing more than one, the fire response time would not be meeting the National Fire Protection Association standards. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. And then with all the development that's happening around this area, I know that fire staff isn't here, but are there plans to have some increased support for emergency services in this region in the near future?
Fire is working now to develop a RFQ to solicit master planning services. I think you all realize we have been looking at this fire issue a lot this year. We have realized this is something that, as an organization, we need to look at. I'm not expecting that project will be complete for another 9 to 12 months, and that would put in motion capital planning for design, construction, land acquisition, design, construction. So I would say a new station is years out.
Thank you.
Could you remind us, if you remember, what the fire chief estimated the new station was costing these days? He stated it during one of the council meetings.
No, I'm not going to say that. I don't remember, so I'm not going to make up a number. Sorry.
Can I piggyback off that question as well? You may know the answer to this, Bynum. If the rezoning goes through, allowing a certain number of units, at the time of site plan, that number of units would be fine-tuned based on NFPA or fire code standards, correct? No.
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
Are you thinking about how transportation sufficiency can limit entitlement?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that we have a mechanism to limit entitlement in relationship to fire.
Thanks. That answers my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett.
I have a few concerns. recognize that we need additional housing, that we are trying to increase the housing supply across the city, but I think we need to do it in a way that's thoughtful. And I'm concerned about this, the location of this request being car dependent, not near any type of commercial center, transit stops, employment opportunities. And adding this intensity of development, even though it's still considered low scale, doesn't seem to be very thoughtful. And I'm also concerned that the Northeast Special Study Area, or the Special Area Study, NESA, has not yet begun. And the staff report also pointed out a urban service area, which triggers additional policies about timing of growth and the provision of adequate services. I guess in sum, for me, the only positive, I guess, that I see is that it's bringing additional housing. But it seems like the cost of bringing that additional housing outweighs the benefit of the additional housing.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Peeler?
Yeah, I'd just like to say I'd echo all of Commissioner Bennett's concerns. In addition to things, this is very car-dependent kind of development at a time when we're spending a lot of time on this commission and the city is trying to invest heavily in bus rapid transit and other kinds of public transit, which would be nowhere close to this. I want to emphasize a very car-dependent kind of development. Also, just this past week, you might have saw a study came out regarding tree canopy loss in Wake County, which they came out and said 11,120 acres of trees lost over the past decade in Wake County. This seems like a heavily forested lot in a fairly natural area. So. Yeah, in addition to everything Commissioner Bennett said, I would highlight those as well as concern areas for me.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Fox.
You may not be able to answer this. It's a question for staff. Is there a threshold for a number of units that could be serviced by fire with existing infrastructure?
No, it's about the location.
It's
not
a
about-
distance
Yeah.
and a number.
It's about distance, yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Reed?
Yeah, I'll just state that I'm all for housing, as Commissioner Bennett mentioned. I support that, but I think timing is everything. And at this point, I'm not ready to support this location based on the lack of the study and the concern about public health and safety with the lack of services. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you, and forgive me, I may have been taking notes when you said this. Did you make reference to the timing of that study? Perhaps, no?
Sorry.
The
Can you
Northeast
repeat that?
study?
Yes.
We have to issue the RFQ by the end of the year and start work early next year, with completion probably sometime in 2025.
Right. So if we were to deny this case, then it would not be eligible to be considered for rezoning again for another 2 years, is that correct? Or if city
Your
council
action
were.
today is a recommendation.
I'm sorry, if city council were to deny it.
They could ask for a special waiver.
Okay.
If they wanted, of the 24-month waiting period. But they would have to make the request of council.
Gotcha. Excuse me, yes, we are not council. So.
Also, I believe we have a member of the public that would like to speak in opposition to this request.
I see. Thank you. Without objection, I would like to reopen the public comment for those in opposition of this case. We can add an additional 4 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, what's that? Excuse me. Did I not open this to opposition before?
Right. You asked for public comment, no one stood up, so the full 10 minutes has not been used.
Oh, excuse me, yes, okay. So in that case, the full 10 minutes is available.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm hard of hearing, so I was sitting back there, didn't quite hear what you said.
I see.
My name is Ernest Spencer. My wife, Billy Jo, was here earlier but had to leave. And we reside at 4331 Watkins Road, which is within 300 feet of the boundaries of this proposed subdivision. I'm not opposed to the subdivision itself, but we are opposed to having these high-density homes built in that area. It's not, like I've heard some of you echo the same thing, that it is a long ways out for such buildings to be built, apartments and high-density housing. There is no bus traffic or way to get there. You got to have a car, and that area, Watkins Road, I don't know if any of you have ever been on or not, it's a very narrow old country road. It's been paved over 2 or 3 times. The shoulders in some places are like 10 or 12 inches before you get to the ground. It's a very dangerous road, curvy, hilly. Motorcyclists like it. But it's not a good area to build high-density homes, and with the traffic on the roads that we have out there now is horrendous. The only 2 outlets are over on Watkins Road, which hits Mitchell Mill Road, and everybody knows that's a high-density traffic area. And then the other outlet would bring you down onto Forestville Road, which is bumper to bumper every morning. I sat there this morning. It took me like forever to go just 1 mile just to get to Buffalo Road. And so it just really has become a real bottleneck in that area. A lot of people come from Wendell and Zebulon through there trying to make a shortcut over to North Raleigh or to Wake Forest. So, like I say, I'm not opposed to them building single-family homes there, but it's a quiet community. I'm afraid that with the high-density housing, we're going to get types of people in there that, will take advantage of the people in the neighborhood. I've already had experienced one break-in in my home about 4 years ago, and probably from some disadvantaged person. So anyway, I just want to make sure that I did hear some of you expressing my same concerns. That's just not the area to put high-density homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from those in opposition of this case? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the table. It sounds like there are several concerns about this case in particular related to the density and its lack of proximity to services, jobs, and retail and emergency services, excuse me. Would the applicant like to respond to that? Any of those concerns before we potentially make a motion?
Yeah, I would just one comment about the neighbor mentioning the conditions on Watkins Road and talks about walkability, and that, development of this site will result in improvements along Watkins Road. As you can see here, all of this area is, part of the city, and, we believe that this would be kind of a meaningful improvement to, the walkability along Watkins Road. So we think that we would be improving the walkable conditions, understanding that we can't control basically what's going on between us and Mitchell Mill Road, but at least kind of being that first step in roadway improvements along Watkins to Mitchell Mill Road. We'd just like to point that out, but yeah, I've been taking close notes on the comments here as well. And yeah.
Thank you. Any other conditions that you might consider bringing back to a future meeting, or just trying to figure out whether we need to defer or make a motion?
Yeah, we think a little bit of time to address these concerns, to discuss further with the neighbors would be good. So we're happy to, with the deferral.
Thank you. Yeah. Would you like to be moved to the September, your deadline for action is November 11th, so we have potentially, I believe, 6 additional meetings between now and then where we could defer this case. Do you have any specific, would you like conditions in by this week so that we could be on the next meeting?
Let's maybe 1 month out, so that gives us, rather than trying to get all conditions in by the end of this week, it buys us that next step. So rather than coming back in 2 weeks, it would be that following meeting.
Thank you very much. Okay. Then without objection, I would like to move this case to October 10th. Looking at the time, we are now at 11:59. Any additional cases we're hearing, since they're new, would require a full staff presentation and public comment. I don't think that we'll have time for that before we will lose a quorum, especially when we need to address a couple other items. So with that, for those who have been in the audience today, thank you for waiting all of this time. But we will defer the remaining cases on the agenda today to our September 26th meeting. And I would ask, we can look at the agenda at that time, but I expect those will probably appear first on the agenda at the next meeting. Thank you very much for everyone for your patience. And with that, moving on to approval of the minutes. The first item is the August 8th draft Planning Commission meeting minutes. I have one comment there. There is a reference in several places to Vice Chair Miller, and I believe that should be changed to Vice Chair Raines. That's my only comment there. Any additional comments from the commissioners on the August 8th minutes? Seeing none, I will make a motion to approve the August 8th minutes. Do I have a second? Commissioner Otwell has seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Seeing none, that passes unanimously 6-0. Moving on to the August 29th draft Committee of the Whole special meeting minutes. I have a similar comment. There's reference to Committee Chair Miller, and I believe that should be changed to Committee Chair Raines. And the one other comment is on page 3, the first full bullet point. It says that the second sentence, it reads Ms. Miller asked or added that the King Charles and New Bern Edenton NCODs would be overridden by the TOD. And the second sentence is the one I'd like to change. It says she asked staff to add back in any aspects of the NCOD that were not removed by the TOD. I just wanted to strike that second sentence and clarify that all I did was ask staff to clarify if any of the NCOD restrictions would still exist after the TOD were applied. I didn't actually ask us to add those conditions back in. And I can send that to you in writing as well. Any other comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, I'll make a motion with those 2 changes to approve the August 29th meeting minutes. Do I have a second? Commissioner Otwell has seconded. All those in favor? That motion passes 6-0. Moving on to other business, report of the chair. There is, let me pull that. The internet's not working. I believe that I don't have any announcements today that have not already been covered. Moving on next to the report of the members. And I can just go down the line. Vice Chair Raines, I'll start with you.
I do not have anything to report beyond what we talked about on the upcoming Committee of the Whole meetings. Just to let the group know, I will not be able to attend the September 19th text change meeting or the September 26th Planning Commission.
Thank you very much. Moving down the line, Commissioner Otwell.
No report.
No report.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett.
Infrastructure and Mobility will meet September 28th at 3, immediately prior to the Committee of the Whole meeting. And a clarification, I should take a note from Bynum and not try to recall things. I did not vote to deny Clover Lane. I don't want to get emails. I actually made the motion to approve it. However, I added like a consideration for council to look at how they might work with a new Wake County housing bond or something to preserve the affordability for the existing residents. So I just want to make that clarification before I get emails.
Thank you. Commissioner Fox.
As Vice Chair Raines mentioned, we have a text change committee meeting on Tuesday, September 19th at 4 in One Exchange Plaza, room 809.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the report of the Assistant Director.
Just as you said that, David said to me,
No strategic planning meeting this Thursday.
that's right, there is no strategic planning committee meeting this Thursday. I'll be talking with Mr. Mann about setting up a possible October meeting to discuss the housing policy issue that you all asked council to give you space to review. So that's coming. I wanted to mention that the state planning conference is coming up in a month in October, the 11th and 12th of October in Durham. And we do have funds available to help you with registration if you would like assistance. And there are single day as well as full conference registration options available. I haven't heard from anyone particularly wanting subsidy. And so if you are interested in attending, I think it's likely that we would be able to help you with a full registration. And then I wanted to also mention that October is Community Planning Month, National Community Planning Month. And you can anticipate that during October, I will be carting around a giant picture frame a la Planning 100 by 100, Roberta, and asking you all to take pictures with staff and during meetings to help us promote all the hard work that you all do, along with staff and all kinds of planners throughout the city to make Raleigh a great place. And I think that is all that I have for today.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to clarify, my board docs and internet is not working right now, but on the report of the Assistant Planning Director, I believe it did not have anything listed on the agenda for the text change committee meeting. Has that changed?
That's my understanding, yes. The last time I talked with Keegan McDonald, who staffs the committee, he suggested it might be November before he would have anything for the committee.
I see.
That would be fantastic.
So we may not have a committee, text change committee meeting this month.
Can I just confirm, Mr. Raines, you said no text change committee this month and no, you would not be here on the 26th?
26th, yes.
Okay. I just will say, I appreciate every single one of you for being here today and helping us make quorum. It makes it matters when you do not meet. It matters to the public and it matters to staff. And like, you're not even the people that I need to be telling this to because you're here today. But it just represents a lot of extra work and confusion all around when you all are not able to meet at your regularly scheduled times. So really appreciate when you are able to be in touch with us in advance about your plans so that we can communicate with the public in advance and also just plan accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And any other comments for the good of the order? Well, then in that case, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.